In today's episode, Kaya Mindlin is back on the podcast. Now, if you have been a listener of the show, you know that Kaya needs no introduction. She's been on the show several times. And if you explore our show notes at talk.yoga/listen, you will not only see Kaya's full bio, but we'll also link to her previous episodes. Now, on the show today, we talk about the spine and yoga, specifically the subtle spine in the Sukshma Sharira and moving away from Western view of the spine. So we talk about how yoga looks at the spine, not modern day yoga, but how traditionally you looked at the spine. We look at the Sukshma Sharira. Kaya walks us through different parts of it. Are there practices that are harming us? How do we connect to the Sukshma Sharira when we've been trained so much with the Western model of looking at the spine in a certain way? And it is a very vast and loaded topic, but Kaya breaks it down slowly and in bit by bit for you to understand how this works. So I hope you enjoy it. As always, everything is at letstalk.yoga/listen. I'll see you on the other side. Hi, Kaya. Welcome back to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. It's been a while since we've had you back here.
Nice to see you, Arundhati. So nice to be together again.
I'm very intrigued by this topic that we're going to get into. And we're going to be talking about the spine in yoga. So to kick things off, how does yoga view the spine?
Yeah. Okay. So this is a big topic and we could go in so many directions. So I think I'll start by saying yoga views the spine in the way that yoga views everything, which is in a multi-dimensional, multi-layered way. So the answer to almost any question in yoga, including what is the spine or what, is, well, what's the context? Who's asking? Why? For what purpose? So yoga will view the spine in terms of the physical realm, what we would, call part of the physical body, the sthula sharira, to use the Sanskrit. And so there, the spine has a structural purpose, the central axis of the physical body. It is the channel of the nervous system, the central channel of the nervous system. It is responsible for movement in all of the different possible directions, and it is responsible for stability. And we can talk about that later because that's very different from rigidity, which is how it's mistaken, I think, in yoga land. So there's the physical realm and purpose of the spine. And even there, the yogic viewpoint, which we can get into, would be very different from, say, the anatomist, sort of mechanical view of the spine. So there in yoga, everything that is alive, is consciousness. So the spine is not something mechanistic or purely materialistic. It is something that is alive and constantly undergoing unfoldment within the body. Then we have the subtle realm, the Sukshma Sharira, and we would look at the spine there as what I call subtle spine. A lot of people in the yoga world will call it energetic spine, but the word energy is so vague and often misused.
It's too broad.
Yeah. So I will say subtle spine, or the subtle conduit of consciousness within the Sukshma Sharira. And this has a name, which your listeners, many will know, which is the Sushumna Nadi. And that is the most important, the biggest, we can say, channel of prana, but it's so much more than a channel of prana. It is the channel of the Kundalini Shakti. It is the channel of the Soma nectar that pours from the head down to the root along the spine, the subtle spine. And Sushumna is fluid, and it is open, and it is the realm of the regions of the chakras and the flow of prana and all of that. And the word Sushumna can be translated as what gives pleasure or what is blissful. And so that is how we look at the Sushumna. And there's so many stories connected to the Sushumna, which we could get into that are within the tradition. For example, those who are looking at the video of this conversation can see that I have Parvati here behind me, and Parvati is daughter of the mountain. And in the yoga tradition, the spine, the physical and the subtle spine, is seen as being like the Himalaya. It is this sacred pilgrimage site. And so every vertebra is like another peak of the mountain. And Parvati is the divine feminine that's, waiting, abiding at the base of the mountain. And she can go up and down the mountain on a pilgrimage. And she can go up and meet her mate, Shiva, who pours down as the Soma nectar. And that's their marriage, their merging, their dance together. And so there's so much meaning and story and aliveness in the notion of the physical and the subtle spine. I'll go back to the physical for just a moment as well to say that Ayurveda also would look at the spine as being the central channel wherein we would see the primary seats of the doshas. So the doshas are along the spine in that the primary seats of the doshas, say kapha dosha is living, we might say, or seated or supposed to be seated in the lungs and the upper portion of the stomach. And that's right along the front of the spine. And then we have pitta below that in the intestines. And then we have vata below that in the pelvis. And these are their seats. So the spine is very central to the Ayurveda viewpoint of the physical body, which of course is never separated from the subtle, because dosha is something that's subtle. You can't, cut the body open and see dosha. So physical meets subtle. And then we have the causal realm. We have karana sharira. And the spine is incredibly important when we're thinking about causal body, because when we're talking karana sharira, we're really talking samskara. We're talking these deep-rooted karmic patterns, what in Western psychology we might call the unconscious mind. Excuse me. And so they say in the tradition, at least in some contexts, in some scriptures and oral tradition, they say that the samskaras, the deep-rooted patterns that travel from life to life, live, so to speak, in the realm of the spine at the causal level of the spine. And so this is just a little bit of an overview of some of the ways in which yoga would look at the spine.
It's fascinating because it's so expensive. And oftentimes I think we do a disservice to yoga students and yoga teachers by narrowing it down to just anatomy of the spine, right? And then there is, some talk of the chakras and things like that, but it's not, people don't have a full view of the spine itself. So you mentioned stories. Okay. I'm like, should I hold off that question for later or now? But I think we'll start here. Okay. Do you want to tell us some of the traditions, stories, or anything that the scriptures tell us about the spine? Because I'm sure the listeners would want to know too.
Yeah, sure. Let's go right into it. Because this is really, when we think about the Indian tradition that you grew up in and that's so dear to my heart, this is really where everything begins when we go into this tradition. It always starts with stories. I'm sure when you were a child, you heard so many of the Puranic stories, and they just are part of your life. And my children have been raised on them. And the teachings and the experience come out of the stories. So I always love to start with that, even if it might be more sort of esoteric and mysterious. So I just mentioned one example, which is this marriage of Parvati and Shiva, which we can take to have so many meanings in terms of spiritual seeking and the spiritual journey. And we can take it as well into the experience of the body and the yogic journey within the body as well. But when we're talking about the spine specifically, another sort of imagery that's part of Purana, traditional, Indian ancient story, I love the image of Narayana sleeping and resting, abiding on the serpent. And so I'll just sort of describe this image for those who aren't familiar. And anyway, those of us who are, we always love to hear it anyway. So Narayana, who is Vishnu in his abiding, resting form, he's supine, lounging on his bed, so to speak, his sofa. And at his feet is his beloved Lakshmi, and coming out of his belly button, like an umbilical cord, is the stem of a lotus, and within that lotus is Brahma. And they're in a dark, deep, watery realm. And the serpent is named Adishesha. That bed that he's lying on, this is a serpent. It is Adishesha. That serpent, we can say, is representative of the spine. So I'll talk a little bit about Adishesha. Let's say about Narayana first, actually. So Vishnu is the upholder of dharma, the upholder of the cosmic order. And when he wakes up, the cosmic order, the manifestation comes out of manifestation. It comes out of existence. And when he closes his eyes and goes to sleep, he dreams the manifestation into existence. And the divine feminine is at his feet, much like the feminine divine rests at the base of your spine, abides there, right? And is the root of the manifestation, we can say, is Mother Earth, is the Devi that is manifest as everything. And I love this image of Brahma coming out of the stem from his belly button, much like the umbilical cord. This is the source of our creation at the microcosmic level, and that they're in a watery realm in the way that, the physicists say that everything came out of a watery realm. And the way that we know that when each of us were created in utero, we were in a watery realm, connected by an umbilical cord. So there's so much depth there. And now Adishesha, this is the serpent on which Vishnu is resting, where he wakes and sleeps and wakes and sleeps and brings the manifestation in and out of existence. The Shesha is Shesha Naga, he's known as, or Adishesha. So let me break down the words, because out of the sound comes the meaning and the story and the mystical. So Shesha comes from a root which is shish. And shish means what remains or what abides. It also means balance and residue. And shesha, which comes out of that root shish, means a keepsake. So let's just start with that for a moment. If we think of this serpent as being like the spine, so when you lie in shavasana or you rest in your bed and you go to sleep, you're lying on your spine. Your spine is your bed. Mm-hmm. It is your support in the body. It is a source of support in the body. And your spine is what remains. They say, when the body dies and it starts to decompose, or even if it's burned to ash, what remains the longest is the components of the spine. And so that shish means, one of the meanings is what remains. How interesting. And it also is keepsake, as I said. The shesha means keepsake. And what is the spine retaining at the karana level, at the causal level, is karma. And the karmas, the samskaras, are our keepsake. It is what we sort of hold on to from life to life, from waking and dreaming and waking and dreaming, from birth to birth to death, and so on. So that's the keepsake, life to life. And that's retained within the spine, within the shesha. And then we have this word residue, another meaning of shish. So this is very interesting. And it kind of brings us back to the anatomy. In the embryological understanding of how the body comes into existence, so when we are an embryo state, form in utero, what the embryologists say is that first we start as a bindu, as a little dot, essentially, which divides and subdivides and subdivides and so on. And once we really start to form into being what will become a human being, the very first thing is what they call the primal streak. It is your original spine, and they call it the primal streak. And then that streak kind of disappears, but it leaves a residue, which is shish, means residue. And that residue of the original primal streak becomes the spine, the pelvis, the head, the brain, and the heart. And so all of these are profoundly connected. They all come out of that residue, shish, of the primal streak. I get goosebumps when I think about all of these things, and I don't understand why anybody would be interested in any other tradition. So that spine has all this meaning in it. And then Adishesha is the name of this particular serpent. Adi means first, foremost, supreme, most important. And so this is the most important, supreme spine, the supreme serpent, upon which the upholder of dharma, the upholder of the cosmic order, is abiding. But it is also the spine within, and he represents divine support, conduit of consciousness. The holder of consciousness is the spine, the seat of the spiritual process. The residue that is the karma is the holder of that residue, the protector. He's holding and protecting Vishnu. And then there are many forms of the Naga coming and protecting, say, Krishna. When Krishna's being carried, to protection after his birth, he's protected by the serpent putting its hoods of all of its heads over the baby Krishna. So he's the protector, the stability. It is what remains in the way that your spine remains and supports and upholds you as a being and upholds your spiritual journey. And the spine is the mystic spiral and so many other things. And I'll just end this little piece by saying that Sheshanaga takes birth, has avatars in the way that we say that Vishnu or Narayana takes birth. There's many avatars of Vishnu like Ram and Krishna and so on. The Naga, the Sheshanaga that is supporting Narayana in this watery realm also takes birth. He takes birth as Lakshman, the brother of Ram, who's always supporting Ram. Mm-hmm. And he takes birth as Balarama, the brother of Krishna, who's always by Krishna's side, helping fight his battles and supporting him. Mm. And they say he takes birth as Patanjali. Mm-hmm. And this is why if you look at an image of Patanjali, Patanjali is in serpent form with 1,000 heads. And 1,000 heads, 1,000 in Vedic scripture always means infinite. And so this is the spine.
I'm glad you condensed it because there's so much there and it's not easy to condense it. So what I'm trying to think here, as you're talking about the stones and just how much there is to the spine itself. So modern yoga approaches the spine very one-dimensionally, right? So for yoga teachers and the audience we have are people who want to study deeper yoga and find more meaning to their practice. So how can one understand the gap, or how do we bridge the gap between this very Western approach to the spine, where it's all anatomy, and we need it. I mean, I understand what entry and we have to move our bodies and you're only as young as your spine is. But how do we bridge the gap and move people, at least in their own understanding, from the physical spine to everything else that you're talking about the spine, the expansiveness of the spine?
Yeah.
The Sukshma Sharira.
So I would say that there are places to bridge the gap, and there are also places to let go of old or problematic paradigms and move on and mature. So absolutely, the Vedic tradition, yoga, does not leave the body behind, right? Body is crystallized mind. Body is the sacred pilgrimage site. Body is necessary. It is only in a human birth that we can undergo a spiritual journey, such as a human being can, journey of awakening and so on. So the body is never left behind. This is why we have Ayurveda. This is why we have asana, pranayama, and so on. We're always utilizing the body as a vehicle for the pilgrimage of spiritual awakening. And we want the health of the body so we can have live a long life and, engage with the purpose of life, with our swadharma, and engage with the 4 aims of life overall, and go through the life journey that we're here to go through, each of us. So the body's never left behind. But we do have to take a look at the dogma that is the materialistic and mechanistic thinking about the body that, it plagues Western culture overall. And it has not only seeped into the yoga world, but I would say it's really taken over, where the body is viewed as a machine and it's fixated. And your listeners know that the body is fixated on. But even where people have a little bit of a better view, so let's assume that, your listeners are not using yoga for purely athletic or aesthetic purpose, which is what we see in really mainstream yoga land. So that's really clear that that's problematic. Many people are coming out of that. But then we have this sort of fixation on what people call biomechanics. And just listen to that word. It's still treating the body as a machine or as a problem to be fixed or as something to push and pull and tug and manipulate. And then we end up on a binary that's treating the body as a bunch of separate component parts that need to be either stretched or strengthened. And when I see this, I always want to know, where is the yogic thread in that stretch, strengthen binary? Where is the yogic thread in the obsession with core strength? Where's the yogic purpose in it? All of that is based in a sort of a materialistic view that takes the body apart into a bunch of different component parts and doesn't treat the body holistically. And here I'm even just talking about the physical body as a symphony, as something that's all connected. And I'll give an example here. Years ago, I was on faculty in an yoga therapy training. So this was 1,000 hours of training the students would have by the time they completed this. And the students in this program already had, most of them, 500 hours of training and had been teaching in the field, teaching yoga successfully, many of them. And this group also had an additional, I think it was all of them had gone through a 100-hour anatomy program. They knew the name far more better than I do as a yoga therapist. They knew the name of every single component part from the anatomist's view. And they were all in pain. Almost every single participant, there were 25 of them in this program. They were all in pain. Some of them had medical diagnoses. They did not know what to do with their bodies in spite of knowing the names of every single part. And I remember I was giving them an experiential class, and one of them called me over because she was having excruciating pain in the pelvis. And so I did some hands-on work with her body, yogic therapeutic work, in order to allow her pelvic muscles to let go and soften and that whole region to flood with nurturance. That's physical and non-physical. So she deeply let go. And if yoga is nothing else, it's a letting go program, right? So I did some things to help her pelvis let go in a matter of about 60 seconds, and the pain completely resolved. And immediately her anatomist mind said, well, what was it? Was it the inguinal ligament? Was it the pubococcygeus? Was it the sacroiliac? What is it? Name it for me. And I said to her, does it matter? And she paused and she went into her body, that was finally pain-free. No, she said, it doesn't matter. Knowing all of that never helped her with the pain. And no problem, so to speak, in the body is ever due to one part, because the body is all working together. What grips? When one area grips, other areas are gripping. When one area lets go, other areas let go. And Yoga Land isn't really approaching the body with that truly holistic viewpoint. It's just purely sort of materialism, as though the body works according to a set of fixed laws where if you want to, fix one part, you tighten another part. And I would say let me say this one more thing about anatomy. First of all, much of what we know about anatomy is based on working on cadavers, dead bodies. So there's got to be a huge gap between the reality of the body and what the body knows of itself, and what we think we know about the body when we look at a dead body and cut it up into parts and decide what we're going to name those parts. That isn't the body's own reality. That's a projection. And there's value in anatomy. There's some value in knowing the parts and the systems and how they function together and all of that. But it's limited. It's still a human, limited, materialistic projection onto the body. The body doesn't view itself in that way, and it doesn't experience itself in that way. So I think we need to see the limitation of the anatomist view and let it go when we're really inquiring, because when we're holding on to any viewpoint about the body or anything else, we're not inquiring. And what yoga is it's inquiry. It asks us to go within, to interiorize our attention and listen deeply. And listen, what is the body asking for? What is the body telling me? What is the body saying no to? And am I overriding that because I have an idea about core strength and what the body should do or should accomplish or should achieve or will fix it? We need to sort of let that go. And I would recommend that yoga teachers and yoga students who are interested in the body, as well they should be, it's part of the manifestation, it's part of the cosmic order, it's a beautiful thing, look into the embryological viewpoint. The embryologist viewpoint of the body sees the body as alive and as in a constant dance of unfoldment, which is so much more in tune with the yogic view. The embryological view sees, the spiraling of the body, which is, as above, so below, as in the big, so in the small. It is the whole universe is in spiral. Look at the planets and the galaxies, and look at the embryo that starts as a streak and then curls in on itself and then opens up again. And we do this all day. We go into a curl and we then expand. And we do this in yoga. The body curls in on itself and expands. And so this mystic spiral is missing in anatomy. The mystical is gone, the subtle is gone, and the aliveness is gone. So I think we need to just acknowledge that and sort of let it go to some degree.
I also think, just a side note, it's not really a question, but I feel like in modern yoga education, there is this urgency to replicate. Like you learn something, next day you want to go teach it. And there isn't enough time in the pause, which also I think harms the teacher more than anybody else, because then they are taking away from their own experience. But can you talk a little more about the subtle spine? Because I'm pretty sure the listeners are thinking, okay, there are the chakras. We just did one, I told you last week, on the chakras. Then you mentioned Sushumna Nadi. We've spoken about this Ida Nadi, Pingala Nadi. So how do they all tie together? Or, yeah, I mean, it's a big question. How can we make the subtle spine more relatable?
Yeah. Okay. I want to go back to, it may not be relatable in the beginning, but I think it's still necessary to, how we tie it all together is we have to name these aspects of the human experience as though we're talking about separate parts, subtle, physical, causal, and so on. And that's something that we also have to let go of. It's a model. And so then we have to see this is all happening at the same time, so that when I'm working with the physical realms, if I'm doing it in an interiorized way, and we can talk about that, then I am working with the subtle, and I am working with the karma, the causal, and I am working with the mystical, the stories, using the body as a pilgrimage site, working with the body in that way. So actually want to tie your question to your comment about this sort of shape-making imitation model that we see in Yoga Land, because I do think it's connected. I think the answer to now what do we do with this knowledge that the spine is a subtle spine and all of this is we remember to interiorize not just our awareness, but our practice, the physical practice. And when we are looking at a shape that someone is doing or a picture, and then we're imitating it, we're doing a peripheral practice. We're looking at the outside of someone's body, and then we're imitating that by manipulating the outside of our bodies in order to look like what's going on the outside. And then what we end up doing for most bodies is working with the periphery of the body. And there I mean the ligaments. So we're stretching the body to create certain, let's say, more extreme shapes in order to create those shapes, we are forcing, pushing, pulling the body in various ways that are the opposite of interiorized. So I'm hoping what I'm saying makes sense. The imitating the shape is exterior because we're looking at the outside and we're making our outside look like that. And then what we have to do to the body in order to imitate certain idealized shapes in yoga is also exteriorized because it's generally based on gripping more peripheral muscles and overstretching more peripheral regions of the body, particularly the ligaments of the shoulders, the hips, the waist, and in some cases, the knees as well. And so all what that does when we are overstretching those ligaments is it exteriorizes the attention, the awareness, it exteriorizes the activity, and it destabilizes the body. Because the ligaments are not meant to be overstretched. They're what anatomists will call the seat belts of the joints. The ligaments are actually meant to provide some stability to the joints, which are meant to move, but not too much. So when we overstretch ligaments, that sends a signal to the being that there is a lack of stability. The seatbelt's not doing its job. And the body thinks, let's say you're overstretching shoulder ligaments. The body thinks the arm is going to get yanked out of the torso. You're overstretching hip ligaments. The body thinks the leg is going to get yanked out of the hip socket. And so in a natural response, because the body is built to protect itself, the nearest muscles to those joints will grip in order to provide stability. And what are the nearest muscles to your shoulder joints and your hip joints, your shoulder ligaments and hip ligaments? The nearest muscles are connected to your spine. So what I'm saying is, when we overstretch ligaments due to an exteriorized, shape-making, imitative kind of practice, the spine, the muscles connected to the spine, grips, compresses, shuts down, tightens in order to provide the body with a sense of stability. And then what's happening in the subtle, causal, mystical realms, let alone what's happening to the doshas, what's happening to the organs, what's happening to the central physical axis. What's happening is you are cutting yourself off from the subtle. You're cutting off the flow of prana in Ida and Pingala, which need to crisscross and flow. Where they crisscross the Sushumna, we have those where we install the chakras and so on. We're cutting ourselves off from that inner flow, that fluidity, that subtle journey within. We're cutting ourselves off from accessing the causal level, the samskaras that want to be resolved, the problematic samskaras that want to be resolved. And we're also cutting ourselves off from the yogic samskaras, which are also there. Samskaras are not all bad. We have problematic samskaras that get in the way. And we have yogic samskaras that are calling us within, that are calling us to spiritual awakening. So when we are overstretching the body, forcing the body, over tightening the body, over muscularizing the body, we're really cutting ourselves off from the health of the physical spine and the fluidity and the stories and the mystical journey of the subtle and causal spine. I hope that that makes sense and ties that together in some way.
No, it does. It does. And like you said, right, this is such a vast topic. It's going to take, this is just the exposing themselves to this aspect itself. For a lot of listeners, the subtles be a new concept.
Yeah.
So I think it's very relevant. Now, are there any practices that you see us doing that are actually stopping us from experiencing the subtle spine? I know you mentioned the exterior shape and us on a very outer level, tugging and pushing and pulling the spine. Mm-hmm. But is there anything that we are doing in popular yoga that you see that we could pause and consider switching or changing or doing it differently?
Yeah, this is perfect. So I think let me make a couple suggestions maybe. And remember that if this suddenly makes a listener, freak out because you may be attached to practices, remember yoga is a letting go program. It is not an attachment program. And that means the attachment to our practices, which are a vehicle. They take us to a certain place and then we let them go. So I'll just give this metaphor first, and then we'll go back to some practical suggestions for asana and other kinds of practices potentially. If you are going on a pilgrimage, so anyone who's been, say, on a yatra to a sacred pilgrimage site, let's say you're going to one very special sacred site, say at the top of a mountain. Along the way, there are always smaller shrines and temples and sacred sites along the way. And you stop at them and you have darshan. You have the site of these sacred shrines and temples and places along the way. And you also stop and have tea along the way and snacks and so on. But they're just a stop. You don't stay in those sites along the way. You just pause, you spend some time, you have the darshan, you get the benefit, and then you keep going. And that's true of inner divine experiences that happen in meditative, experiences within. And it's true of various kinds of sadhanas and practices that we do along the way. They're all part of the journey, but they're not the end point. So we always, as we mature, we let go of what perhaps served us to a point, and then we inquire, okay, can I go deeper? So one suggestion is you could try not using a yoga mat, a sticky mat. By that I mean a yoga rug is different, okay? Sticky mat. Why do I say that? The sticky mat allows the body to go further than the spine wants it to. This is why it's a sticky mat. It makes you stick. So anyone who does, say, let's say a down dog or a broad, wide-legged version of a warrior pose. You know that if you do a very broad-legged or wide stance in these asanas and you're not on your sticky mat, you will slip. Yes, because it's further than the stability of the spine and the bliss of the spine would allow. So you have two options. You either tighten your muscles to prevent yourself from slipping, or you get on a sticky mat to prevent yourself from slipping. And what muscles are you tightening to not slip? It's going to be pelvic muscles. And what is the pelvis? The realm of Muladhara, Swadhisthana, and so on. And you're going to tighten all other muscles in the body, but particularly along the spine, because that's what creates stability when the ligaments are overstretching. So you either grip those muscles or you get on a sticky mat, and then you're not slipping, but you're still overstretching the ligaments. And so internally, even if you don't feel it, those pelvic muscles and all of the muscles of the spine are still gripping. It's become so familiarized that people associate it with strength. But what it is it's rigidity and tightness. So my suggestion is get off the sticky mat. Get a beautiful yoga rug if you want to have a special, something, and do a practice without that stickiness that allows you to push the body further, and bring the stance in. Pull it in. So it's not peripheral. It's not stretching. It's not exteriorized, so that you're physically bringing the body in, say, something that's normally done or conventionally done in a wide stance. Bring the body in. Interiorize the physical and interiorize your attention, and practice letting go and leaning into the bones of your body, and particularly letting the core of the body go. That's one example. Another example I would give is, let's take spinal twists. So in spinal twists, they're spinal twists. They're meant to twist the spine. This is the mystical spiral. And magical, very powerful things happen when we let the spine be in the twist. But when I look at photographs of people doing what are supposed to be spinal twists, what I see is big, broad shoulders and twisting the neck as far as it can go and overstretching the waist. And all of that pulls the focal point of the twist out of the spine and into the joints, into the shoulder joints, into the neck, and into the waist, these areas of the spine that already move really easily. When we want to do a mystical spiral of the spine in a spinal twist, what we're looking to do is open very sacred pilgrimage sites along the subtle spine, the heart, and the pelvis. And when we're overstretching the shoulders and the neck and the waist, then what's happening is the heart and the pelvis realm, which are sacred pilgrimage sites in the subtle spine, those areas grip to create a protection. They tighten, they shut down, they compress. So with your spinal twist, it's another place where I would say, let's say it's a Jatara Parivritanasana. Bring the arms down. Stop trying to get your elbow and your shoulder to the floor. Bring in some props. Support the body. Pull the body in. And I don't mean physically, but I don't mean with tension. I mean with propping and with alignment. Less is more. Draw it in. And you could do this with a seated twist as well. Instead of like pulling yourself out and doing this big dramatic twist, keep it in the spine and let it be very interiorized. And use your arms, for example, to create a central channel, subtle inner twist, and bring your attention in. So overall, I would say less is more. Draw it inward in terms of the body. Go less far. Go to a place that feels a little more neutral in the body, and particularly in the joints, where you don't have to tighten your core to create stability. The stability is already there. It's the shesha. It's the sushumna. It's another word for this is the stambha. The stambha is another word in other scripture, tantrika scripture, for the spine. And that's the stability. Your spine is already stable. It's already doing that. It wants to do that. You don't need to grip, create so-called core strength, which is really core compression, core tension. If you let go and soften, yoga's a letting go program, the spine will do its job. It's there supporting already. And then you can inquire and feel the subtle realms while you're in these asanas that are less dramatic and not pulling your attention into your joints and your abdominal muscles. Let it feel more neutral. And then bring your attention into that mountain range within. And how do you do that? People ask. There, I would say, feel it. Some people can physically feel the physical spine or the region close to the physical spine. Feel the muscles in the front of the vertebrae. If you can't feel it, imagine it. Picture it. Because they say, Patanjali says, what you imagine is as real as what you experience. So imagine it. Imagination and visualization is huge in this tradition, and it's not seen as different as the actual sensation, right? So visualize it. Be aware of your breath. The breath doesn't move along your spine. We know where the breath goes, in terms of the physiology, and you know this very well as a pranayama teacher, but the prana that's carried by the breath does move in the subtle realms, including the spine. So be aware of your breath. And imagine or be aware or sense in a subtle way, where does the prana continue to move that's been carried in by the breath? So these are some ways to work with it.
To me, Kaya, this is fascinating. Okay. Also intimidating probably to a lot of listeners, because there is so much to explore. Right? And it's not necessarily available easily, right? Because how do you know if you're going in the right, for lack of a better word here, order, And so do you have any advice for yoga teachers who will now listen to this? They'll be inspired. They'll connect with you on Instagram, all of that. But if they want to go explore the subtle spine, where should they begin? Would it just be in their own? I mean, you said sticky mat, spinal twists, all of that. But if you could give them some direction, is there anything that comes to mind?
Would you like an awareness-based practice or a suggestion? I could happily give a suggestion for a literal asana that people could try while they're listening.
Sure.
Yeah.
The more literal, the better.
Yes. Okay, let's do that. Because it is easier, especially if you are someone who's in the asana world, which your listeners are, it is easier to start with the body. People in the asana world have a natural affinity, a karmic affinity. And and dharma around the body, and there's nothing wrong with it. So let's start with the body, which you can experience and work with, and then see where it leads. So most listeners, most yoga practitioners are familiar with an asana, apanasana, where you lie on your back and you pull your knee toward your chest, right? Sounds familiar? One knee at a time. So I'm going to describe another way to just play, and think of your yoga practice to begin with as inquiry, as playfulness, and as a bliss practice to discover the bliss within. Okay? So a little motivation from the Pratyabhijna Hridayam, which is a Tantrika text, says, through the unfoldment of the center is revealed the bliss of absolute consciousness. So let's go into the center line, the midline, the mystic spiral within, and so on. So here's how to try another way to play with apanasana. You lie on your back and elevate your legs on a chair or an ottoman or some stacks of blankets or a coffee table. So what people nowadays call constructive rest. I think that's what they call it, constructive rest. So you lie on your back like Shavasana, but you elevate your legs. Constructive rest, they call it. Supported Shavasana. You need support under your legs. Okay, so you're sort of in this kind of a bent shape here. You lie on your back, you relax your whole body. Then bring one knee toward your chest. Now, when you're pulling your knee, and you can imagine this first, the way you might normally do this is you pull your knee toward your chest and you look for, feel, or create a stretch in the hip. And people call this a hip opener. It's not really a hip opener. It's actually a ligament stretch, and it will cause the hip to tighten. So normally you pull your leg towards your chest, you pull your knee towards your chest, and you might feel a stretch in your low back or in your hip. And you'll also feel the weight of your leg leaning toward your chest. Okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to bring your knee towards your chest as you might normally, and be aware that your weight of your leg is leaning toward your chest. Then what you're going to do is hold your knee with your hands, sort of cup around your knee with your hands. Straighten your arms and push your knee away from your chest, and let your heel, your ankle rest on the top of the prop that you were using for that constructive rest. So one leg is still in constructive rest. The other leg, you're holding the knee and you've pushed the knee away from your chest. Your ankle, lower leg, heel is probably going to be resting on that propping. And then you check while you're holding around your knee, or if you can't reach your knee, hold around your thigh. And your elbows are straight or nearly straight, whatever feels comfortable. And you check that your knee is lined up with your cheekbone earlobe on the same side. So not leaning out over your shoulder, not crossing over the midline of your body towards your nose, but your leg, if your spine is the middle line, is the mid lane of a road, your thigh and knee is lined up with its own lane, and you're holding that leg away. Make sense? Then you wait. So you've pushed your leg away, you're holding your knee or your thigh, no fingertips. When you use your fingertips, that causes the spine to tighten. You hold with your whole hands. And then you let go. So your arms and hands are working a little bit, and you let your leg become utterly free from effort, which is how Patanjali says you master asana. Become utterly free from effort to master asana. So you let go your leg, let go your pelvis, let go your low back. Your hands are working to hold your leg here so that everything can let go. I think of it like holding a newborn baby. Your leg is like the baby. It's not holding itself up at all. And your arms and hands are like the adult holding the baby. And then you wait. Stay 60 seconds, 90 seconds, 2 minutes. Let go and inquire within. Feel what's happening internally through the pelvis, through your low back. What is happening if you're letting go is the weight of your thigh bone, instead of leaning towards your chest now, will be leaning into and through your hip socket and facilitating a profound letting go in the pelvis. What is the pelvis? It's the base of your spine. It will facilitate a profound unfurling, unspiraling, letting go of the realm of your sacrum, Swadhisthana chakra region, and the realm of your tailbone, the Muladhara region. This is profoundly deep, and it's all connected. So when that region lets go, the skull will open up, the heart will soften, fear will start to be released, Hold it for about 2 minutes. And by hold, I mean hold with your hands, let your pelvis go. And then you can lay that leg down and do the other side. If you do this every day, at the end of your day, let's say, because you spend your day tightening up and tightening with your body, but also tightening through thinking and worrying and so on.
Yes.
Do this, take 5 minutes every day. Do both sides. And be aware while you're doing it. Let go and listen deeply within. If that's not yoga, I don't know what is. Let go. Listen deeply within. When we listen deeply within, body heals. Subtle realms are there. The subtle's there all along, but we become more aware and we get the subtle working with us, and we're working with it. And the mystical realms within open up as well. That's one little practice to try.
That's wonderful. And it's very relatable, and it's something I think the listeners can try and then reach out to you directly and tell you what their experience was. As always, Kaya, it's been wonderful. I know this is such a vast and complicated topic to get into. So I thank you for trying to simplify it for us and make it as easy to understand as possible. And for the listeners who are newer to the podcast, Kaya has been on here before. So we'll make sure to link all the episodes that you have done. And for future, hopefully there won't be such a big gap of you returning on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arundhati. It's such a pleasure. And I hope that it's helpful and beneficial to your listeners. It's a joy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for making it to the very end of this episode. If you enjoyed today's show and if you're doing the homework that Kaya gave you, make sure to screenshot this episode, tag Kaya and me on Instagram, share your thoughts. You can also interact with me newsletter, which will be going out this week. I'll see you next week with another episode, another conversation. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.